Now that we've seen the general reason why fortune can't be what leads to our true happiness, now Lady Philosophy wants to show us how each of the specific things that constitute fortune, wealth, power, fame or reputation, and pleasure, that each of these things in and of themselves, if we pursue them as the source of our happiness, they're actually going to lead to the opposite of what we seek. They're going to lead to more unhappiness and more dissatisfaction. So what we're going to do is look at each of these. We're going to see why we seek it, and then we're going to see how in the very seeking of it, the very thing we're seeking it for, it leads to the opposite of it. So let's think of wealth, first of all. Why do we pursue wealth? Well, what we mean by wealth is money, because money can buy us anything. You can have all of the possessions and things you want, but you can only have them if you have enough money to buy them. And so you can see that there are a lot of different reasons, but they all can revolve around four things, you might say. Most people seek wealth for the luxury that it will bring us. In other words, it will give us a better lifestyle. We can have all the bling, we can have the jewelry, the nice clothes, the nice car, the great food, the personal chef, all of the things that make our lives more enjoyable, and enjoyable to the extent that material possessions can give us that enjoyment. So a kind of bodily enjoyment. So we get it, we do it for luxury. We also do it for freedom, right? We want that higher income, and we want the income to be our own, because then we can say to our boss, take this job and shove it. In other words, we're not dependent on other people the more wealth we have, we think. And that's why we play lotto, is we can get this Powerball or something where we're going to get these billions of dollars and therefore can quit our job. It's not that we don't want to do work, it's just that we don't want to have to depend on others for our living. And so it gives us power and freedom, we think. Wealthy people get the wheels of anything they want moving. When you're wealthy, you can get away with a lot more. And so a lot of us want that for its power and its freedom. And of course, when you don't have money, you feel insecure. How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to have enough money for food? How are you going to have enough money to send your kids to school? And so without money, we worry, and we think if we have enough of it, if we just have the right amount, then we will have security. And finally, a lot of guys think that if they have enough money, then they can attract people of the opposite sex, that they can have a lot more friends. So let's start with that one, because it's pretty easy. Now, I remember when my wife and I were celebrating New Year's and Y2K, the year 2000. And I remember we were watching the ball drop in New York City, and we were watching it, and they were discussing how various very famous and rich people were celebrating the new year, bringing it in. And a report came in about how Donald Trump was in his Florida mansion, just playing down the celebration. He didn't want to have a huge celebration, so he was only having a few thousand of his closest friends. When I heard this, I laughed. My wife laughed. Because the question came to our mind, if he didn't have all this money, would he have a few thousand close friends? How many of these friends are only friends because they love him for his money? It's like the song Gold Digger, if you've heard that song where, I'm not saying she's no gold digger, but she ain't going for no broke. He broke. So the idea is, the more money I have, if I think that's going to attract more friends, make me a more lovable person, then I'm fooling myself. Everyone knows that the more money you have, the more unlikely, the harder it is to distinguish those who are really your friends, those who really love you for yourself, versus those who love you from what they get from you. So the more money you have, the more likely it is that you're going to be insecure in your relationships, because you're not going to be certain that these people are with you for you or for your money. And so it actually leads to the opposite. And now let's think of security. Again, with money comes bling, and with bling comes problems. If I'm driving my old 86 rusted up Mustang through town, through a bad part of the city, of New York City, I have very little to worry about in leaving even the door open. Nobody wants it. I can drive it, gets me from point A to point B, and I don't have to worry. Now let's drive my Mercedes-Benz, new, brand spanking new. I remember when I first got a new car, I was so happy, but I was also less secure. When I parked it in Walmart, I had to go and park it in a place where no one would hit it. And that's very difficult to find. Every little ding on that car was like a rock hitting my own skin and causing scars. Because the more I have, the more I have to protect. The more I have to have alarm systems, the more money I have to spend, and actually the more I have to depend on other people like accountants and others to protect my wealth. And the more I have to worry about the vicissitudes of the stock market and industry and the things that I don't have control over. And so actually, the more money I have, it can get to a point where I have more worry and therefore less security. Now, here's something important. Boethius isn't saying money is evil. When he talks about wealth, he's talking about the kind that brings on these problems. Having just enough money so that you can be content in life and get your needs is fine with him. But those who pursue wealth for happiness are doing it because they think it's going to give them an independence or a security that it can never give them, because it is always in danger of being lost. And the more you have, the more you worry about losing it. We know this because we also know that those who are wealthier tend to be less generous with their money. Statistics prove this out. Actually, the most generous people are the people with the least amount of money. When you get to the $250,000 tax bracket and above, you find that they are the ones who give the least amount of money to charity. Why? They feel the least secure with their money. If you ask somebody, are they wealthy? They're going to judge by the amount of luxury it gives them, the amount of power and freedom. We'll talk about power and freedom below. So if you're going for wealth because of that, you're going to see what that leads to. So let's skip to luxury. That's perhaps the major reason we think wealth is good for us, is it's going to give us the high life. We're going to be able to have better food, better clothes, better entertainment, more pleasure in life, more bodily pleasure, because that's all that wealth can give us. It can't give us spiritual pleasure. It can't give us more learning per se. You don't need a lot of wealth these days to learn. And so, thus, it's luxury that we want. Well, what is luxury? Luxury is that above norm feeling of pleasure, isn't it? It's when I'm driving a new car that I compare it to what I drove before, and I feel it's so much smoother, it's so much nicer, it's got all of these features. And so luxury is that experience of being above the norm in pleasure, of extraordinary pleasure, of extraordinary comfort. Well, let's say you now have this wealth, and now you have a new lifestyle, and this new lifestyle does what? It becomes normal, doesn't it? You get used to it. And when you get used to it, it's not above the norm anymore, is it? And if it's not above the norm, then it's not luxury anymore, is it? And so therefore, if what you're aiming for is luxury, after a while, this new amount of money, this wealth, is no longer wealth, because your lifestyle now is the new norm. It's the larger life, but now you have to maintain it with larger money. So thus, if that's what you're pursuing wealth for, then you need a new amount of money, don't you? It will produce the desire for more money, because now this new norm is not luxury to you anymore. It's just the normal way you live. And so, thus, this shows us that the more you pursue wealth, the more you want wealth. The more money you have, the more you spend, and the more, therefore, you want in order to get that feeling of the wealthy lifestyle. And so it's a never-ending desire that can never be satisfied, because it produces a new demand for more. That luxury always leads to a new lifestyle, where what was luxury before now is necessity. And so this leads us to less of an ability to suffer. I had a pair of alpaca socks. These socks are amazing because they're so fluffy that you feel as if you're walking on clouds. But one day, I got a single grain of sand in that sock, in one of the socks. And because every other part of my foot felt in complete comfort and had no feeling whatsoever as far as hardness was concerned, that single grain of sand became irritating to the max. Why? Because my lifestyle and the socks are so cushy that the slightest discomfort became exaggerated. That's what happens when you have a luxurious lifestyle. The slightest lack from that lifestyle becomes suffering. The more luxury you have, therefore, the less you are able to stand it when you have the slightest amount of suffering. So the more happy you are, the more your happiness is unstable. The more you will suffer from even the slightest loss of it. Whereas before, without it, you could have felt as if nothing was occurring at all. And so wealth doesn't lead to a greater amount of enjoyment. It makes it less capable of enjoying a variety of circumstances. We become spoiled. Wealth doesn't lead to a luxurious lifestyle or satisfaction. It always leads to a greater desire for more money because the luxury becomes the new norm, because we need more to keep ourselves secure, because we need more to keep those who we think are our friends still loyal to us. And so thus, the more we pursue it for these reasons, the less we get the very things we're pursuing. Well, what about power? Power that we're talking about here is not power in the sense of of strength, because obviously there's always people who are physically stronger than us. What we're talking about is the kind of power that allows us to have domination over other people, to influence others. That's the whole point of political power. So those who pursue power as that it's going to give them the kinds of things in life, including wealth, that it's going to make their life happy, they do it for a variety of reasons too, but mainly it's to get people to do what they want, right? Why? Because if they can influence other people, then they can protect themselves. They can have security and freedom. So it all comes from getting other people to do what you want them to do. But think about that. There are two ways you could do this, right? You could either do it by persuading them, convincing them to want what you want, but then they do it because they want it, don't they? Then that in itself is not power. You are then depending on them to want what you want, and by seeking to persuade them, you are actually not having power over them, but you're giving them power over themselves by saying, I will not force you, I will seek to allow you to make the final decision. So that's not what we mean by political power normally. What we mean is some kind of manipulation or force to get people to do what they normally wouldn't want to do. But force can't be exercised, Boethius says, over people's minds. In the end, they're going to either do it or not, depending on what they value. So the only kind of force you can have is over their bodies, through bodily threats to their health or their possessions or their loved ones. And so therefore, if the more political power you have, the only use for it is force. Well, what kind of force are you going to need? Well, you're going to need armies. You're going to need a police force. You're going to need people who are willing to exercise force for you. So in fact, the more force you exercise, the more you will depend on having others who are convinced to follow you and exercise that force on your behalf to force other people to do it. And so therefore, the more force you exercise, the less power you have, because the more you're depending on others to continue to remain loyal to you. But now you're going to have anxiousness, aren't you? You're going to have paranoia. Someone like Stalin would go through these purges. Why? Because he realized that the people who he allowed to exercise force on his behalf so that people hated him themselves would eventually use the power that he put in their hands against him. That's always what what you have to worry about. The more force you exercise on others, the more you create others who are powerful and therefore have the power to topple you to get your power. And the more you create people who hate you and therefore want to topple you. And so it produces less security and less freedom, because now you are dependent on others who you can't trust because they themselves want that same power. But let's say none of that happens. Let's say you are able to keep people loyal so that you can use your army to force people to do whatever you want. Then you get whatever you want, don't you? You never have to restrain your desires because every whim can be fulfilled. And so therefore you never get self-control, do you? In fact, the more power you have to force others to do what you want, the less you have to control your own urges. And therefore the more you give rein to them, and therefore the more you become a slave to yourself. Not to the higher self, not to the self that's conscious and makes decisions, but to the desires that are not you, that change and are fickle. And so therefore you become the worst kind of slave. You either become a slave to others who could topple you at any second, or you become a slave to desires which change all the time and become greater the more you indulge them. And therefore, those who seek this power become slaves.